Once again, we are back into the book of Revelation, and today we are in Revelation chapter 6. We're going to look at this chapter and study some more details into what it says and what it means. But before we actually get into the chapter, we need to understand, take a pause and understand the bigger picture of what God has in mind and how that bigger picture is being played out in these chapters of the book of Revelation and in the book of Revelation as a whole. One of the things that we need to understand is that the book of Revelation is not just a book with amazing images and different creatures and things that sometimes might be hard to understand, but it is actually a book which fits into the overall plan and program of God. Once we understand that bigger picture, that overall program, we begin to understand how God is bringing that program or that plan to pass. It will become easy to see how the book of Revelation fits into that, and therefore easy to understand the book because we know the bigger picture behind the book. And this bigger picture actually begins in the book of Ephesians, very interestingly enough, not in the book of Genesis, but in the book of Ephesians. One interesting point to note, Genesis talks about the beginning of creation and mankind, but the book of Ephesians tells us what some of the things that went on before creation. So really you could talk about the book of Ephesians has given us information about the mind of God before he actually created things physically. And when he created those things physically, that is where the book of Genesis comes in. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 1, all the way to chapter 1, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, and 6, the Bible gives us some information about what God's original purpose was, or what he wants to achieve on the earth. And when we read those verses, especially Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4, 5, and 6, what this shows us is that God desired and still desires to have a created species, a whole new created being, separate from the angels, separate from what was there before, but a new created being with which he could have relationship. Verse 3 tells us in Ephesians chapter 1, it tells us that he blessed us with those spiritual blessings, but what these blessings are, verse 4, 5, and 6 begins to tell us what they are. Verse 4 says that we are chosen, or we are chosen to be holy and without blame before God in love. In other words, the desire of God is he wants to have that, he wants to create us with the same character he has, holy and blameless. And so that when we have the same character that he has, we could then relate to him because we share similarities. There are common grounds between us and him, the same character that he has. And because we have that same common ground, we could relate to him. And the relationship he wants is love. That's what verse 4 tells us. And he chose us specifically for that. God didn't let it happen by chance. He made it happen. And so he chose us to give us the same character like himself, so we can have common grounds to relate with him, but in a love relationship. And then verse 5 tells us that even more specifically, this relationship was he desired for it to be a father-son relationship because he adopted us as children. So it's not just relationship, but it is relationship as children relating to fathers, a specific kind of relationship he always wanted and still wants. And then verse 6 tells us when we have this relationship with him and when we enjoy this relationship with him, the natural result of that is that he gets praise because this relationship shows how great and marvelous and excellent his grace is towards us. In other words, what God wants is to be in a relationship with us where we relate to him as Father He relates to us as children. But in this relationship of love, He releases His grace to us. We receive that grace and we enjoy it. And because of that enjoyment and experience of His grace, we respond to Him in praise. We respond to Him in worship. This is what God always wanted and what He still wants. To release to us, and then we receive from Him, respond to Him in praise. So Ephesians tells us what God's original intent was, and it is still His intent today. When we jump back into Genesis, when He actually began creating mankind, Genesis chapter 3 tells us that because of our sin, original sin that Adam and Eve committed, and by extension all of mankind, this plan that God had, which is to have sons that He could relate to, this plan became effective. Sin was the hindrance preventing this plan from being fulfilled. So what God did is that God decided to choose one man, his family, to start the whole process all over again. And that is in Genesis 12, when He called Abram, and He changed his name to Abraham. So what we see then is the desire of God being hindered because of sin, but then God put in a solution in place, and to get that solution in place, He began the first steps by calling a man named Abraham and his family to do some things through that family. And so when we get to Genesis chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and 3, we see the solution God had in place to get us back to where He wants us to be, which is what Ephesians chapter 1 talks about. The solution was to call a man called Abraham. And in that calling, when we read verses 2 and 3 specifically of Genesis 12, we see that God told Abraham that He will give him a land if he leave where he was living, Ur of the Chaldees. He promised that He will give Abraham a land. He will make a great people out of Abraham. And then through Abraham, all families of the earth will be blessed. So we know that that land He promised to Abraham, we call it the promised land, Canaan. Today is called Israel. And today is actually where Israel is really a small part of what was originally promised to Abraham. So it's the promised land. The people the Israelites, the 12 tribes of Israel, and God promised that He would give him that people. And then God promised that through that people, He would bring salvation to all. Through that people, all the world will be blessed. And so this is God's strategy to get us back to where He wants us to be. What Ephesians chapter 1 says is a threefold strategy. It is land, a specific people to inherit and dwell in that land, and then through those people who dwell in that land to bring salvation through all the world. It's very specific. God was very clear on what His agenda, His strategy was. The land and the people dwelling in the land, is to be used to bring salvation. And when salvation comes, He will still be working through that people who dwell in their land to perfect that salvation, to bring it to full completion. And so Genesis chapter 12 verse 1, 2, and 3 gives us the strategy. What we have now in the rest of the Bible is the fulfillment or the working out of that strategy. In the rest of the Bible, we see Israel coming into, first of all, we see the land being inhabited by people who were wicked, and God had to drive them out. Then we see Israel inheriting the land, and then of course we see Jesus coming years after to bring salvation. But the people of Israel in their land is still God's focus, because through them perfect salvation will come. So the rest of the Bible focuses on that fulfillment of the people, the land, and the salvation. But from there in Genesis, the next major the next major message that God gave, or the next major uh, explanation God gave to us as to how He's moving forward, is found in Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, all the way to verse 27, the ending of that chapter. He gave more information. And in that chapter, he spoke about, again, the people of Israel. That was mainly about Israel. Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. He said, an angel came to Daniel and was explaining to Daniel what God is going to do in the years ahead. But very interestingly, when he began by explaining it in verse 24, the angel said, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. So these 70 weeks, which is when God is going to bring to pass what he originally wanted, the angel told Daniel it was specifically related to Daniel's people and Daniel's city. Daniel's people were the Jews and the city was Jerusalem. So when God began to give some more explanation in this chapter, Daniel 9, about how he's going to bring everything back to his original intent, which was relationship, he was basically telling Daniel, I'm going to do it through your people, and I'm going to do it through your people over a period of 70 years. In Bible prophecy, over a period of 70 weeks. That's what he says in Daniel 9:24. In Bible prophecy, that translates into 480 years. And of those 480 years, 7 years are still remaining to be fulfilled. The entire 480 years have not been completed, because the angel went on in the other verses to explain to Daniel what would happen. So we know from the explanation in the other verses, verse 25, 26, 27, that there are still 7 years remaining in which God intends to work. And these 7 years are still future to us. But before we reach those 7 years, the next time when we have a major explanation with respect to how God is working things out to get back to his original intent, is actually given to us by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24. To some extent, Matthew 25 as well. And this passage in Matthew 24 is also alluded to in other Gospels. But in Matthew 24, Jesus begins to give a little more information how God is going to work things out. So prophetic scripture like Matthew 24, Daniel, the book of Revelation, is really God telling us in advance how he's going to work out things to bring us back to where he wants us to be. As Ephesians chapter 1 says, a relationship of sons related to him based on his grace. In Matthew 24, Jesus gave us a whole list of events, things that would happen to indicators that we are coming closer and closer to the fulfillment of what he always wanted, bringing us back to the original intent. But it's very interesting, in Matthew 24, the first part of that chapter, Jesus spoke about general signs that were related to everybody, the Jews and the Gentiles, everybody's signs, that the earthquake and famines and the rumors of wars, those are signs that relate to everybody. But as you read later on, the other verses in Matthew 24, Jesus begins to focus on the Jews specifically, where they are referred to as the saints, or the elect specifically. That's the term he used in the other parts of Matthew 24. He begins to talk about the Jews specifically. And he told them about when they say the abomination of desolation, that the end is near, the time is near. And he told them to flee. So in Matthew 24, Jesus gives them some general signs to look for, and he gives them some specific events that relate specifically to the Jews. And he interestingly quotes even some of the things that Daniel spoke about when he spoke about the abomination of desolation. Daniel spoke about that in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. So Daniel gave us some information, then Jesus begins to narrow it down somewhat, tells us things that would happen with respect to the world, the Gentile nation, and he told us things that would happen with respect to Israel specifically. And you can read Matthew 24. But not only that, the next time the Bible continues to give us some more information is interestingly in Romans chapter 11, chapters 9, 10, and 11, more specifically 11. And in those chapters, and more specifically Romans chapter 11, Paul explains to us. So first of all, the book of Romans gives a very masterful explanation about the gospel and what is the gospel. And in chapters 1 all the way to chapter 12, he spoke about chapter 1 all the way to chapter 8, he spoke about sin and being justified by faith, overcoming everything by the Spirit, the power of the Spirit. But then from chapter 9, 10, and 11, he begins to talk about Israel very specifically. So the question is, if Paul is speaking about the gospel, the good news, salvation to the world, why does he begin to talk about Israel in all of that? How does Israel fit into the gospel? And what the point Paul was making, especially in chapter 11, is that when we begin to talk about the gospel and salvation, Israel is integral in that. When Jesus came and died and rose again and the church was born, God did not throw out his plans for Israel. The church did not replace Israel. The reason why Paul, in the book of Romans, when he is dealing with salvation and explaining salvation, the reason why he talks about Israel in the mix and in the middle of all that conversation is to show that God is still working with Israel. As a matter of fact, in the plan of salvation, God is working through the church and he's working through Israel simultaneously today. He's working through the church to preach the gospel, but he's working through Israel so that the Messiah will be returned to bring judgment and execute his judgment on the earth. Even though Israel is in unbelief today, God hasn't done away with them. When you read especially Romans 11, the Bible shows us that. Paul says that God is able to bring them back in, graft them back in, because they are his people still. So one of the key things that Romans chapter 11 shows us is that God's intent and his work is not to replace Israel with the church, but he is still working on Israel. And in these days we are living in, more and more the focus is getting more on Israel, because that is key in God's program. And then of course, after all of that, we come to Revelation chapter 6 all the way to verse 90. And what is going on here in these chapters is essentially, so let's backtrack a little bit. In Revelation chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, Jesus was speaking to his church. And you can look at the previous videos that we did, where we explain what chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, what they were about. But essentially, in these first few chapters of the book of Revelation, Jesus was speaking and he was addressing the church. Because remember, we said that today, God is working through the church and also through Israel to bring his plan, his original plan, back in place. What was his original plan? Ephesians chapter 1. To have a relationship with sons based on his grace so that he could get praise. And he is working through the church and through Israel today to bring that to pass. Even though Israel is in unbelief, they are still the elect. And when you read Romans chapter 11, Paul says all Israel will be saved. And he says when they come back, imagine what glorious effects or results that would have in the world. And I believe we keep hearing about the greatest revival is going to take place soon, and God is going to pour out his spirit. And we will see the greatest awakening and more souls being saved than ever before. And I believe the reason why that will happen is because when Israel recognizes their Messiah, today Israel is in unbelief and people are being saved. Things are happening, deliverances are taking place. But when Israel recognizes her Messiah, believes, the effect of that will be multiplied salvation, mass miracles, because when the people of the elect people of Israel, when they come back, if you read Romans 11, the Bible talks about it will be basically life from the dead. There will be major revivals, major blessings poured out into the world. Romans 11 talks about that. And that takes us into Revelation. Because what Revelation shows us is that God is dealing with the church and with Israel simultaneously. In the first few chapters of Revelation, Jesus was dealing with the church when he sent the messages to the churches to clean up his church, to deal with his church. And so that through the church, his message could continue going out to the world. But then when he finishes cleaning his church, when he finishes through his word cleaning his church, he moves his church out of the place because his purpose through the church would have already been accomplished. And then he begins to focus again solely on Israel because his purpose for Israel is not completed as yet. So from Revelation chapter 4, moving forward, he is focusing on Israel, his people Israel, because his purpose is for them. Where did they get that purpose? Way back in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, 2, and 3, where God called Abraham. He says, I'll give you a land, I'll make you a great people. Through those people, all families of the earth will be blessed. That is the assignment of the Jewish people, that through them, all families of the earth will be blessed. And that assignment is not completed. It is through them, all families of the earth will be blessed. And so, in Revelation chapter 4, chapter 5, but mainly chapter 6 onward, God is going back to work through Israel, so that through Israel, all families of the earth will be blessed. That is the focus. That is what the book of Revelation is mainly about. It is bringing what God told Abraham in Genesis, bringing it to pass. And so, in Revelation chapter 6, all the way to verse 19, we see God working through Israel. How he is doing it? He is doing it by the person called Jesus, but more specifically by Jesus as our kinsman redeemer. And when you can look at the video we did in Revelation chapter 5, where we explain what a kinsman redeemer means. But it simply means a person who is related to us. Because he's related to us, he could intervene and he can help us come out from the problems that we are in. He can redeem us. That means pay a price, bring us out from problems. And that is what he is doing in Revelation 6, all the way to 19. He is functioning as the redeemer of mankind, but he's doing it through the people of Israel. And every time in these chapters, when he opens, Revelation 5 talks about a scroll, and it was sealed with 7 seals. And Jesus is going to open each of these seals. That scroll really is a record of the inheritance that God gave to mankind. But we lost that inheritance because of our sin. In opening up the scroll, what Jesus is doing is giving us back the inheritance. He is redeeming or buying back, purchasing back the inheritance and giving it back to us. And that is why he is opening these seals. That is the transaction that is taking place when he opens each of those seals. Every seal that is open is Jesus dealing with things on the earth and buying back or bringing back or redeeming the inheritance of mankind. That's why we see so much judgment in the book of Revelation, because it is Jesus functioning as our redeemer. The word redeemer means to pay a price or to buy back, to bring back what we lost. So when each seal is broken, it is really Jesus performing specific judgments and specific redemption acts to bring back to us what we lost. And that's why we see all these judgments. We see stars falling, we see wars, we see pestilences, because what that is Jesus through those judgments bringing back to us what we lost, because he's our kinsman redeemer, and he's doing it through Israel again. Because remember, Israel's assignment is through them all the earth will be blessed. So through Israel in the book of Revelation, Jesus is working to bring back what mankind lost. And with each seal that is opened, and after the seals there are trumpets, and then there are vials or bowls. Each of these things just simply represent the various judgments that Jesus is going to execute on the earth. And with each judgment executed, different aspects of what man lost is restored. It is being restored. It is being brought back. And then when all of the judgments are completed and all the seals are open, it means that Jesus would fully redeem or fully buy back or fully bring back everything we lost. And then God now, in chapter 20, 21, and 22 of the book of Revelation, brings everything back into its original order. And we go right back to Ephesians 1, where we begin to relate to him as children, relating to our Father in a relationship of love based on his grace, so that he could get praise when we receive his grace. And that is what the book of Revelation essentially is about. And that is where we are going to go as we begin looking at Revelation chapter 6. So in the next video, we'll be getting into chapter 6 and studying the meanings, the details, some of the symbols, the meaning, the seals, studying the details of what's good. But what we need to do is to keep this big picture in mind so we can understand the details as we get into that. And so, once again, I'm hoping that this has been helpful to enable you to understand some more, a little better of what the book of Revelation is about. One of the things too, when we study the book of Revelation, it really helps us to understand the mind of God and how God functions and how God thinks. Because it's interesting, how we see things is generally not how God sees things. And how we believe things should work out, many times it's not how he sees it should work out. And so we're going to study this book, and we'll be getting an understanding more of the mind of God and his ways and how he thinks. So it'll be very interesting. So I hope this is helpful. Let me again remind you and invite you to subscribe to this channel, or if you're looking at this on other social media, like this video, share your comments. If you have questions on the book of Revelation, type your questions. If you have any suggestions on what you would want explain, things that you don't understand, type them in so we could include that in the videos and make it more of a benefit to you, be of better service to you. But for now, this is the introduction, and then look out next for Revelation chapter 6. So